coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Well, I'm reminded of an old line from our dear departed friend Mike Ullman, which I think I've said here before, about Joe Biden, which was, well, Joe Biden has 30 years of experience in the Senate. He's a seasoned politician. And Ullman's quip, having known Biden and worked with him, not for him, of course, but with him in the Senate Judiciary Committee and other environs, said, well, Biden may have 30 years of experience, but as far as I can tell, the experience resets every year. So we've got something similar going on with Kamala. Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast at The American Mind. I am your host today, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the Claremont Review of Books and The American Mind. And I am joined by a new regular, although he's a name known to all of you in print, assistant editor of The American Mind, Mike Sabo. And we're joined as well by Spencer Clavin, whose latest and greatest title, I think we decided, was editor extraordinaire. For new listeners, this is kind of a running gag now. We could never figure out Spencer's floating title at The American Mind. So now we're just going to make it up every week. So we will take
the great Zog, yes, the editor extraordinaire. It's like a circus act.
Yeah. We're recording on Thursday morning, which is unusual for us because of some travel stuff. Normally we record on Wednesdays and release Thursday, but this will be out later today. There's one thing on everyone's mind. Well, those of us burdened by a life in politics and political commentary anyway, and that is the DNC convention. Kamala will speak tonight to end the convention. The general run of show for the week has been Monday was Biden, praise Biden, see off Biden, and it actually was an interesting kind of representation of the state of the Democratic Party and Biden right now, because they kind of screwed him as usual. They put him on really late. I think he went on at like 11 p.m. Eastern. His speech was a little rocky at points, as we've all gotten used to Biden's cadence in his waning years. But Tuesday was, what was Tuesday? Tuesday was sort of, I think the Obama spoke Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday was Obama Day.
Obama Day was Tuesday. Michelle, well, I'll get into the details as we get through each of these. We finish our summary. Wednesday, yesterday, was Tim Walz was the highlight in a way. Oprah spoke. It was kind of was it a strength through joy evening? Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was the announcement of the joy of the campaign and the future and all the rest. And including a stint from Bill Clinton, among others. And tonight we'll have the finale. So I have, maybe I'll lead with my Michelle monologue. Michelle and Barack, really, they for me, they're sort of the most interesting of the convention so far because of their role, or at least especially Barack's role in shuffling Biden off the stage. His longstanding, as we all know, sub rosa kind of worry and in many ways contempt for Joe Biden's political skills, although he does a good job of hiding it. Well, I'll get to my macro conclusion in a minute. Let's go through Kamala. Let's go through Michelle real quick. I mean, she was up there to kind of humanize Kamala, to talk about both their mothers and how they instilled values of altruism in each other. Some poll quotes: "My girl, Kamala Harris, is ready to be president," to much applause. This was a bit of a howler, I thought. She went through her career. She went into public service because her mother taught her, like Michelle's mother taught her, that you got to give to people. And so Kamala went to work for the people, prosecutor, senator, which led Michelle to say she's one of the most qualified people ever to seek the office of the presidency, which, many spit takes at home, I think, watching that live from Republicans.
Well, Michelle has always had a very bleak view of American history, Ryan. We recall that the first time she was ever proud of her country was some moment in the Obama presidency. So actually that tracks if she thinks everybody before Kamala has been some sort of like degenerate.
I thought, it's an interesting, to analyze it a little bit. If she's the most qualified, one of the most qualified people ever to seek the office of the presidency. It must mean that Michelle just thinks that ascension through offices without much distinction is the equivalent of experience. I mean, Kamala ran in a Democratic Party machine state where she should have won, and she did. Won her reelection somewhat narrowly, given the political demographics of the state of California, and then had a fairly lackluster term in the Senate. The biggest highlight of which was a pretty mendacious and demagogic and nasty display at the Kavanaugh hearings. And then she was picked. I know we're not allowed to say this, but it's obvious she was picked as a diversity hire for the Biden-Harris campaign. I mean, he said it in not so many words, and everyone kind of talked about it that way, although in more polite terms, until it was, you're not allowed to say that. And of course, she was qualified, and he couldn't have picked anyone else. So that's what amounts to experience. And then the failed vice presidency, which, by all metrics, I think we should be able to say, unclouded by a partisan lens from the Democratic side. I mean, whether it's the border or the sort of repeated and painful, ill-prepared public appearances. It's part of why they've kept her off stage and away from the press so far in the presidential run. So yeah, I guess I'm reminded of an old line from our dear departed friend Mike Ullman, which I think I've said here before, about Joe Biden, which was, well, Joe Biden has 30 years of experience in the Senate. He's a seasoned politician. And Ullman's quip, having known Biden and worked with him, not for him, of course, but with him in the Senate Judiciary Committee and other environs, said, well, Biden may have 30 years of experience, but as far as I can tell, the experience resets every year. So we've got something similar going on with Kamala. And then Michelle, I don't know if she ended with this, but sort of the mid latter part of the speech, she got into the Obama stock and trade, which was a bit of light racial demagoguery. Trump, she said, feels threatened by successful Black women like Kamala and me. And then she harkened back without saying it to his appearance in front of the Black Journalism Association. And she said, who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be another one of those Black jobs, one of those, not one of those. So she was getting folksy. The crowd loved it, but we all know what was going on there. And then Barack, interestingly, Obama, especially in contrast to Biden, we are reminded about how much more deft of an orator he is. So the speech was well delivered. Michelle's was well delivered. I mean, the energy in the room always helps these things. It's for those of you who've given public speeches, when the audience is feeding you energy as you speak, it just gets easier and easier to do well at it. And that was certainly the case in Chicago. And Barack, he praised Biden, whereas Michelle didn't talk much at all about Biden, and warned in so many words his fellow Democratic conventioneers that they needed to quit being so crazy. Otherwise, they're going to lose the election. I mean, he didn't put it that way, but he did his sort of Obama thing that he did back in 2004 at the convention, which was sort of unity man, Barack Obama. And, our fellow Americans who are Republicans are not enemies. We need to reach out to them and understand that, we may disagree on policy, but we're all good people. And so there's a stark contrast to the kind of spirit and some of the rhetoric and tenor of the left-wing activism we've seen on campuses and in the streets since October 7th. So Barack, ever the skilled politician, realizes they have a real problem. So this was his attempt to remind everyone that they need to tamp down the crazy until they win, which, he did his own Obama version of in his 2 terms as well. Well, that's enough out of me for now. I have a label for this convention, but we'll get to that in a minute. But what have you made of it so far, Spencer?
Well, the Obamas are supremely talented. They always have been. Sinister, but talented. They're both really good at this. I, in an act of self-care, have not really been watching the DNC. I've been learning about it from press releases, but it's extremely clear what game they're playing here, and it's exactly the right move for them, not just for the Obamas, but for the entire setup situation. I'm sure that Dr. Jill is somewhere absolutely seething, crying, throwing up over the treatment of her husband, Joe. Doesn't matter. That's fine. That they need him off the stage. They've got the entire press at their disposal, essentially, to just pretend that the Joe Biden presidency never happened. And that includes the Kamala Harris vice presidency. I mean, the most interesting thing here, Ryan, you alluded to it, is the Kamala Harris vice presidency isn't a failure from our perspective, from the perspective of guys like us that find the entire Democrat project bankrupt and morally disgusting. Of course, it is. The whole presidency has been a failure from that perspective. But the Kamala Harris presidency is a failure from the Democratic perspective. Democrats have been dissatisfied with Kamala Harris for the majority of her career, and they've not been afraid to talk about it until about 5 minutes ago, when it was in their interest to confect this elaborate story of her rise to greatness from humble origins. I don't know exactly how it goes, but I did just want to read like one little portion of this CNN piece that I was looking at, because I think it gives you the template, the story template that they're all applying to this very remarkable and unusual underlying set of events. This guy writes, Harris must also disqualify Trump, which they have kind of moved away from that whole, threat to democracy thing, and instead moved toward this joy, which the Obamas were, we forget, like the pioneer of that too, right? Hope, change, these giant kind of almost theological sounding words layered onto raw, grasping partisan politics. But here's the thing that really got me. Harris's uneven performance as vice president raised doubts about her capacity to ascend to the job. So there's a nod to the fact that Harris is just welded to the absolute worst elements of the Biden presidency, the parts that are least popular, least appealing. The border stuff is like totally on her. All the DEI stuff, again, we're not allowed to talk about that for some inexplicable, well, we know why. We're not allowed to talk about it because it's inconvenient, but we all know that they said they wanted this like particular demographic category. Now, her strong debut heading the new presidential ticket. What strong debut? We've barely seen her. She's not even appeared in the press. There's just the strong debut they're talking about is their effective end run around the public to kind of conceal her until this moment. And it's kind of, to me, fascinating that we're recording this podcast like before the moment of truth, because I do think we've now reached the full extent of what the press can do for her, which is a lot. And when combined with this very disciplined party politics that we're seeing, it might be enough to push her over the finish line. But at the very tip of that iceberg, right at the end this evening, they have to actually take Kamala Harris, an actual human person who, we must remind everybody, exists, like occupies some geographical coordinates in space-time, and therefore it can't simply be memed into unreality, and has to like walk onto the stage and say words. And every time she does that, she reveals herself as like a black hole void of intelligence, charisma, and talent. She sucks them all out of the air. That hasn't changed. So to me, this is the most fascinating part of the whole election. The most frightening part, because if that doesn't turn out to matter, if the reality of Kamala Harris doesn't turn out to matter, then we'll be every bit as sunk as the doomerists say, in some sense, that this entirely fantastical presidential run could succeed. But I think that Act Two is literally about to begin as we speak, and it won't start until after this podcast drops, when Kamala appears, and then we'll have to proceed on some kind of platform along the lines that she's been indicating. My hope is that means the beginning of the kind of downward drop from this like roller coaster we've all been on, but we'll find out.
No, I think you hit, Spencer, and thank you guys, by the way, for having me on the podcast.
Welcome. It's good to have you.
Looking forward to the future. But really with Harris, I think you have the kind of political consultant class, what they've kind of formed. But that doesn't line up with, like, say, 6 months ago. You have a woman who, I mean, staff turnover in her office as Attorney General for the state of California, as Vice President. I mean, it's been remarkable. Amy Klobuchar, I think, is probably the only one who even comes close to that. And obviously, that's not really a campaign thing. Campaigns are not won or lost on that. But that just shows, look, this kind of, smiling, almost Jack Nicholson-esque Joker visage that we kind of have from her. Like, that is not real. Tim Walz, I mean, his weirdness, his just kind of jumping up and down. It's almost like he's on like a pogo stick or has him in his shoes or something perpetually. I have no idea what's going on there. That is actually probably real. But with Harris, what we're seeing is clearly manufactured 100%. Somebody who just, I guess, wants power for the sake of power. I mean, I think there's probably way more than that there. DEI hire who wants to put CRT into everything. I mean, all those things I think are very true. And you just see kind of the dregs of what the Democrats are about, what they're going to, what a, Harris Walz presidency would look like. It would just be a complete sideshow. And then internally, as things absolutely deteriorate, disintegrate, and it's obviously a very scary thing to contemplate, to think about. To think we're only, I think 75 days away, I think 74 days away from the election. And especially with just what's happened previously. I mean, everybody's forgotten. Obviously, politically, there are many political reasons why. I mean, Trump was almost assassinated. I mean, that happened about a month and a half ago. No one's talking about that. Oh my gosh, you're right. Now. I mean, it's amazing to contemplate. I mean, that whole series, Trump being assassinated, Joe Biden stepping
almost
down.
Being assassinated.
Oh, yeah, almost being assassinated. Thank you.
Please, don't speak anything into existence.
The media's even scrambled my own mind right now. But all these things happening one after the other. I mean, in a state of span of 6 days, I think it was. I mean, just incredible to think about, incredible to contemplate. And just, it's a combination, obviously, of the media moving at light speed, the media being basically an arm of the Democratic Party, doing their bidding. It's just incredible to me. Like you too, as an old millennial, I've not really actually watched any of the DNC live, but I have seen clips. One of the many things I wanted to bring up, Oprah Winfrey on stage talking about, economic inequality. I mean, that is just absurd. And that's the thing about the Democrats is the reality and their rhetoric. The convergence, I mean, the difference couldn't be larger. I mean, it's almost like, as big as the Grand Canyon. I mean, between what they say, what they do. I know that's a typical, like, Democrats are the real hypocrites or something like that. An obvious thing to point out, but still, nonetheless, I think we should. That their rhetoric does not line up to reality in any way, shape, or form. You had the same thing with, actually another kind of even point. You had Bill Clinton up there talking about, McDonald's and kind of riffing on the old Saturday Night Live skit and riffing off of how much he ate McDonald's as opposed to Donald Trump. That's bad when Trump does it, but it's good when Clinton does it. And then you also have too at the DNC, and we might even get into this more, just showing itself as the party of death. I mean, you had a Planned Parenthood RV of death essentially sitting minutes away from the United Center, giving abortions, giving vasectomies. I think I saw a stat where I think they gave, as of, I think yesterday, midday, 25 abortions. So you have a party that is absolutely enthralled to abortion, enthralled to things that are really about disintegration, death, decay. And a party that, again, wears kind of a clown suit on the outside, but a party that is absolutely just about death kind of on the inside. Those were kind of my big takeaways just from at least the clips I saw.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it? The combination of like Trump is the devil and also we're the real Trump. Like we actually are all these folksy things that we've just spent however many years decrying. Anyway, I'm sorry, Ryan, I cut you off, and I really want to know what your title is for this DNC.
Oh yeah, the Leapfrog Convention, because you had it's so you can do like a version. It's a cheap analogy, but it amuses me, so I'll offer it. You have the kind of version of the underwear gnomes meme which to remind everyone, it's from South Park, and the gnomes are stealing people's underwear, and their business plan is step 1, steal underwear. Step 2, ? Step 3, profit. The Leapfrog Convention is embodied by 2 terms of Obama. Step 2, ? Step 3, ? And then Kamala with an exclamation point. So, I mean, we have this weird phenomenon of 2, I was talking to Amelia about this yesterday, of 2 incumbent, non-incumbents running against each other. It's very odd to have the sitting vice president act like the future is her and has nothing to do with the last 3.5 years of her administration with President Biden. And the Obamas, they presented kind of sub rosa in their rhetoric and their tone and inflection, if you'll give me those. They presented a kind of nice, clean line between Barack's two presidential administrations and Kamala, and they kind of left off stage in a way the 2 old white dudes who we really just want to get beyond. So yeah, it's the Leapfrog Convention. We're supposed to just forget. Well, they certainly want to forget about the Trump presidency in the sense that they want to make it just that one presidency, just that one term. And then the Biden presidency is, it's as if it really didn't happen, except for the fact that Joe did the wonderful, searched in his soul, as his wife said, and had the courage to step aside so that the future could be born, and the future is Kamala. It's pretty extraordinary, and it's helped, as you said, Mike. I mean, it just really is much easier to do this sort of thing when your comms department at the campaign consists of the major networks, with one exception, and that filters down to all the satellites and tributaries of news media across online and everywhere else, singing similar tunes, which is, if we just speak it enough into being, it will be, and we'll be done with Trump finally.
I have a question about the name calling element, because we've talked about this briefly, that one of Trump's signature moves is always these nicknames that he gives his opponents. And the first time you hear them, you think that's ridiculous. It's never going to work. And then it sticks. Like Ron DeSanctimonious is the latest one, but there's been a bunch of them, and he seems to have had a hard time kind of finding one for Kamala. He did on the Spaces thing with Elon, he did Kamabla, I think, or right. Kambla blah or something. So that struck me as a dud, and I was like, well, maybe it'll just do the same. Maybe at the first time I hear it, I'll hate it, and then it'll like really work. But it doesn't seem to have. I was at the Daily Wire backstage, I guess, last week, and Matt Walsh was riffing on this and speaking his intentions into the universe, that Trump should use Comrade Kamala, I think it was, and get the lo and behold. I mean, I suppose it's possible that Trump listens to Matt Walsh, but lo and behold, he now seems to be going with Kamala or Kamila or whatever. Verdict, rating out of 10. Is that going to work?
He did use Comrade Kamala in a tweet yesterday, maybe. That's my favorite so far. I mean, it has the benefit of rolling off the tongue, unlike Kama Blah, which I guess is meant to indicate that she's kind of blah. I don't know.
It makes me think of Kesha, who's done a pro Kamala TikTok. So maybe this is not great, but keep talking that blah blah blah. Is this like only for people that went to college in the 2000s or something?
Yeah. And my final quote on the Leapfrog Convention is it's been a rush to put all this together, so you understand why I think one of the Jonathan Martin or one of the Politico commentators made this point, so I give him credit, or one of his colleagues, but which was that they've just appropriated the Hope poster, the iconic Hope poster from 2008, and have put Kamala in it, and I forget what the tagline is. It's joy. I don't know. Maybe it's forward. I think it might be forward.
Joy and death instead of hope and change. To Mike's point.
Yeah, I did on your point about the abortion van, vasectomy van. I mean, it's just such a weird time to be alive. That the one party thinks that was a good thing, or actually, I mean, it's basically one of their major constituencies or lobbies in a way, which is Planned Parenthood, thinking it's a good thing and them going along with it. Maybe some of them were a little upset by the by the framing of that. But there was a good Babylon Bee headline, which was attendee, protester, or DNC attendee accidentally gets vasectomy, thought he was waiting in line for a food truck.
Yeah, do you want fries with the vasectomy?
Yeah.
Jeez, it's so bleak.
And
yeah.
The one other thing that's interesting is, and it's just the Democrats are just much better at this. We were all wondering months ago on this podcast whether this was going to be a rerun of 68 in Chicago. And in like the pre-convention stuff, there was a little bit of protesting, but they locked it all down. And, it's basically the whole thing's cordoned off. You can't get in without ID. They have done a decent job of keeping their left wing under control, which they usually can do when it counts. So it's just another aspect of the asymmetric warfare going on between right and left in this country, which is one party is much more effective at keeping when they feel they really need to, keeping their crazy people under wraps.
It's almost like they, I don't know, sent in the troops. Like I'm old enough to remember when that was a fascist New York Times article written by an evil would-be dictator.
And they built a wall.
All of a sudden, they built a wall. They sent the troops. All of a sudden, using the police to keep protesters down is like a thing again.
Right. I think they even had. I think they even had the sheriff of Bexar County basically out there and saying, we're doing our best to stop immigration and securing the border, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so just the divergence between just, the rhetoric and reality is just, it couldn't be wider. And I think, like you said, Ryan, too, and I think it's just something, again, I think the right just needs to understand because it's asymmetric warfare. We can't do the same things that the left does and expect the same result. The regime is going to come after us if we try to do anything, even just mild protests. I mean, people are getting arrested, sent to jail for violating the FACE Act, which is basically standing outside abortion clinics, and the feds are going to come in, sweep you up, and put you away. The other side, they get to do that. I just think that's reality. And I think even complaining about that, I think recognizing that's great. Complaining about that, okay, but this is the world in which we live. And this is the world in which, quite honestly, I mean, the right, Republicans, has let happen. So that is something that we really need to grapple with.
Yeah, the Wall's speech has been highly praised, high energy, folksy, everyman, America's dad, et cetera. And I saw, at the convention, they make up these, what would you call them? They're vertical signs, which festoon convention halls going back for a long time. And they were all holding Coach Walz up. And he leaned into that and made a bunch of football references and analogies. So yeah, it's you called it a clown suit, Mike. We were talking before this about the skin suit of the modern Democratic Party. They have, and you see it with Kamala mirroring Trump's policies, whether it's the tax on tips or being tough on the border. It's the other aspect of the asymmetric warfare, and it's helped by the media's role as a kind of large roving national comms department for the Democrats. But we have two parties in this country, and both of them, in their various ways, run on policies and then betray their voters. But I think it started a little bit in the Obama administration with, take gay marriage, for example, a complete about face on it after campaigning the first round against gay marriage and marriage between a man and a woman. And then once re-election was secured, pursuing aggressively the opposite position. But I think we'll see the same if Kamala is elected, God forbid. And it will be, they'll be running on a bunch of these policies. Oh, actually, she's not in favor of a gun buyback. She is actually tough on crime. She actually will crack down at the border. She actually doesn't want to tax your tips. And this will be a nice segue into our second segment on Kamalanomics. She actually, she's just a neoliberal. Everyone can calm down. Nothing's going to spook the horses. And then I think once elected, they'll abandon most of those things. And they're helped by the philosophical backdrop of the way the Democratic Party thinks about rights and progress as well, a long-running theme of this podcast. But it's just easier to get away with it because you can kind of fudge your way into saying, well, that was 3 years ago. Now we've had more progress. New things have come to light.
That's
we
what
understand.
unburdened by what has been.
Yeah, we're unburdened
means.
by our previous view of rights and policy, and now we're moving on into the future. Come with us, or be a retrograde reactionary.
Yeah, we're just making a more perfect union. It's just constantly changing. Capital H history is kind of bringing us along, and just kind of actually like the Communist Party. Parties will be then dissolved eventually when the Uniparty just finally takes over and they can never be dislodged.
Yeah, I mean, some of the run to the right, rule to the left stuff is tale as old as time. Like there's elements of it that you always campaign more moderately than
Republicans do it too.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody does it. It does seem particularly extreme and weirdly schizophrenic in this cycle, because at the same time as they're making all these gestures about how moderate Kamala is, or actually really just erasing her radical record more than anything and memeing it out of existence, Kamala is also at a more kind of maybe nuts and bolts or wonkish level proposing, running to Biden's left on economics, basically. And I mean, this is now, I guess we are just talking about Kamalanomics, but
yeah,
she's saying stuff, and maybe it's because these policies are so in the weeds. You sent us, Ryan, a thread about this capital gains thing that's going on, and I was like, okay, hold on, let me just kind of figure out how this works. So presumably for the general public, you can kind of do both things at once. You can pretend to be this moderate on all these big splashy headline issues like fracking and the border, and you can say all these things that you won't follow through on, but at least it makes you look like you're kind of down the middle. And then you can say, I'm going to basically put price caps on food, which is effectively a recipe for bread lines. But do people really know that that's what that means? And the press certainly isn't going to explain it to them. Although that one was so extraordinary that some people, even on the left, did kind of say that sounds bad. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of us maybe.
Yeah, no, I think we can slide into that topic. So Kamala has embraced the Biden budget tax plan that was proposed last round, back in January, I suppose, which consists of a raise on capital gains tax for families with more than $1 million in income to 45%. And then sort of hidden in there, not that hidden, but not that explicit, is the taxation of unrealized capital gains for, I don't know if it's net worth individuals over 100 million, but some income bracket at the $100 million level, which is, it would be an extraordinary step into class warfare taxation policy. That is to say, and very complicated to administer, because a lot of unanswered questions linger out there. Does that mean if you're paying 25% tax on your house appreciation as well as your stock portfolio? It's an invitation to an even more Byzantine IRS code and enforcement to follow. It would, this sort of thing, not necessarily the unrealized gains part, but this sort of thing was tried, I think you guys might remember, in France 8-10 years ago, the kind of aggressive taxation of high net worth individuals. And lo and behold, the shocking thing happened. A bunch of rich Frenchmen moved out of France. So it's in a way the imposition of the very progressive taxation scheme in California on the whole country, thus vindicating our colleague Michael Anton's opening chapter of his book, The Stakes, which said, look, I come to you from the future that is California, and I want to tell you that the other party, that is the Democratic Party, wants to impose this everywhere. And the results, if you look at them in California, have not been good. It has the highest unemployment rate in the country. It's increasingly a high-low coalition of tech and Hollywood and foreign capital, and then a lower middle class and working class, and then just welfare class that's dependent on the rest of the state, and the middle class is fleeing. So that that seems to be the result they're seeking nationally, and it would be a disaster. And I at a certain point, it's been fashionable on the new right these days to kind of roll one's eyes at the talk of tax cuts on the right as kind of boomer nostalgia, or not even good policy because, somehow Reagan and Trump were bad on this issue because it doesn't fit with populist policy. Should have, instead of the tax cut, we should have built the wall, and which I don't actually disagree with that, or we should have reformed healthcare. Those that can all be debated, but at a certain point, you have to embrace your inner boomer and realize that national tax policy is pretty important, actually, and to the extent that we get more and more punitive with the upper echelons of income in this country, it's just going to be a more miserable place for everyone. And and on top of all that, for those who've looked at the fiscal details of all this, it's not like you're going to be able to pay for or reform the debt problem by taxing rich people in this country. It's just the math doesn't even come close to adding up. So it cannot. It would be one thing, and I'm not defending it, but it would be one thing if this was finally a way to fix our debt, our short-term and long-term debt and deficit problems. But it won't even make a dent. So you're just causing a lot of pain and misery, and treating your country more and more like a quasi-socialistic economic project, while not even fixing the real elephant in the room, which is there's just not enough money in the world to pay for our commitments as they currently stand. And taxing $100 million and up households is not going to get you close.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's nice with Kamala that you don't have to spend time on the stupid versus evil debate. Like, you don't have to sit around asking, is she stupid or is she evil? She's both. She's 100% of both all the time. She's both, manages at once to be shallow and empty somehow. Like, this is a person who has no central guiding principle other than power, which is in itself kind of evil. And this is also a person who is simply not intelligent, who simply doesn't know, like, the first thing about economics. And I say that as somebody who knows less than nothing about economics. And even I can tell that this is a complete self-own. I'm curious, actually, where it came from, since it doesn't seem like something that, for example, the Obamas of the world would have recommended to her. Like, this is what I mean about when you let Kamala off the leash even a little bit, you get disaster. You get like electoral catastrophe. Because the taxation thing is so obscure, it might be hard to really explain to people why it's a disaster and why we'll send all of our biggest wealth generators like fleeing the country to offshore resorts or whatever. But the price caps thing and then the housing subsidy thing, both of those are like, they're not just tried and failed policies, they're like tried and failed state policies. Like, these are, revolution generating, state destroying ideas. And leftist economists are coming out in like the Washington Post and saying, at the very least, if you don't want to get called Comrade Kamala, like, don't talk like an unblushing red. That there's just something extraordinarily inept about this, which never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. But it also, it thrills the heart with fear to contemplate her actually executing on this. But I'm glad she's saying it, actually. Like, I think it's a serious error that she's talking about this stuff in such detail. And I think it speaks to the fact that, like, she has nowhere to go after this press fanfare and all the coconut garbage, except to talk about what she thinks, and what she thinks is like, give me power and I will crush you. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I don't know if she's been, reading too much like Thomas Piketty. I mean, remember that guy? Big at the end of Obama administration. I think probably through the middle, and then the end. But it's kind of interesting, almost. Democrats coming back. The boomerang comes back to talk about wealth inequality in a way. But it's like, but we're kind of talking about it, but not talking about it because it's buried in page 83 of what's actually Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget. It's just kind of, to know what the Democrats are doing, it's like, okay, what's a fig leaf? What is real? What is not? You actually don't know. It's really kind of a funhouse thing full of mirrors. But yeah, if these policies are actually implemented, I mean, this goes, I think, way beyond what some people on the new right are talking about, and I think the right hopefully should be all in lockstep opposed to this. But I mean, this is talking about crushing wealth, crushing national industry, crushing our economy in general, bringing it down at a time where entitlement programs, we're coming up just against math that's going to shut these programs down. I mean, Social Security, I'm not certainly counting on actually having that when I retire in 2055, 2060. It's just not going to be around. The math just doesn't compute. And I feel bad for people who are even much younger than me who are actually counting on those things. But unfortunately, I think the uniparty, both parties in some ways, especially the Democrats, always want to lay things at their feet when I can. I think have utterly just mismanaged these things. It's not even about, trains and, running on time and whatever. I mean, these are serious consequences and serious things that are going to have just absolutely deleterious effects to hundreds of millions of people going forward. So this is a serious thing. And again, you look at what Kamala is offering here. It's a disaster. It's a crap sandwich. It is that there's just nothing there. It is just, again, Democrats is the party of death. Okay, we kill people and then we drain all their financial savings, or do it in the reverse. We do that first, drain their financial savings, and then we'll kill you later if you want to.
Well, those are related, right, Mike?
Yeah.
Because population decline exaggerates the problems with social entitlement programs that you're describing. If you enervate the populace, if you depress the number of people you have paying into the system, you're going to run out of money quicker. Now, that doesn't mean having a bunch more babies is going to fix the problems with Social Security,
right?
But it'll surely buy more time, right, to think about this stuff. And as you say, they want to do both at the same time, squeeze from both angles.
Yeah, well, you can help yourself by importing 20 million people in the space of 3 years.
Right. But I mean,
you end up collecting
some going to pay into
yeah. You do end up collecting some tax revenue from them because they work and all the rest, or a lot of them do. Yeah, I'm just wondering, is the I hate using this word, it's so overused, but is the vibe shift gonna be enough, or are we gonna fall back in the second act, as you say, Spencer, between basically the end of tonight and then voting, which starts pretty soon, actually, in some states? Is it going to fall back to the fundamentals? And, David Axelrod on CNN said 2 days ago at the beginning of the convention, this is still Trump's race to lose. If it were held today, I think he'd win narrowly, just like Biden won narrowly in 2020. And so we'll see how effective this is going to be, even with the entire media helping. Just one, I wonder if this is going to be enough. This is a door hanger from North Carolina. Somebody sent me a picture of, and it's Trump's. President Donald J. Trump fighting for North Carolina. He will secure our border, restore law and order, lower gas and grocery prices. Kamala Harris, dangerously liberal. Opened our border, let criminals walk free, will hike taxes on North Carolinians. And then it has a couple little footnote citations to why that claim is true, as the campaign understands it. I suspect that that's going to be running in all the swing states from the Trump campaign's perspective, and I wonder if it'll be enough. It might be. It's very hard to also point out that the national polling and the battleground state polling, the Kamala switcheroo bump has seemed to have stabilized, and in many ways, on the macro polling question, Trump's doing better than he was in 2016 or 2020. So it could still very well be a narrow electoral college, or even a moderate electoral college victory for Trump. It's hard to figure out across the national scene, let alone in all the individual and idiosyncratic swing states. One of which, a former swing state, is where Mike lives in Ohio. Now fairly solidly Republican for the time being.
Very much so.
This is going to be a six. Yeah, it'll be a 6-state race in many ways. This is going to be decided. It's cliche. It's obvious. Of course, everyone knows this. It'll be decided in the idiosyncratic ways in all the states that matter, which is Georgia, Pennsylvania, the upper Midwest, Nevada, and Arizona. And so we'll see how much water can be carried by the massive vibe shift communications operation that is currently underway, or whether people in the voting booth will kind of think back to their last 3 years, their grocery bills, their inability to buy a house, higher interest rates, and the obvious fact, which a majority of Americans seem to believe, which is that the border is out of control and there's only two people to blame in a way, and that's one of whom is now running for president.
Yeah, I mean, you should take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because like when you talk about vibes, one must answer with vibes. I'm getting a sense of diminishing marginal returns, and this might again just be because I, for my own mental health, like have not been watching the DNC, so I've not been like immersed in the atmosphere of it. But in the lead up to this week, everybody was sort of talking about, well, two possibilities. One, you mentioned, Ryan, that they're going to riot and then that'll be bad for the Democrats. But then the other was typically the candidate gets a bump out of their convention. And so people were saying, well, is this going to even rocket up? Like, are we about to see peak Kamala? Because we've had this wonderful press rollout and everybody's having fun and dancing and all the joy. And then we're going to go into the convention with that energy. And it's really just going to like take off like a rocket. And instead it feels like asymptotic, if that's the word I want. Like it feels like we're kind of curving now to the max of what hype can do. And hype is really a better word than vibe. I realize now that I'm saying this, like, vibe is so played out and exhausted and nobody quite knows what it means. But we're talking about hype here. We're talking about like people waving their arms around and yelling and dancing and shouting as loud as they can to distract from the fact that the main act is no good. And yeah, my intuition is that they've gotten about as much juice out of that squeeze as they possibly can.
Yeah, and it's rumored that RFK Jr. is having a press conference tomorrow. So one way to kind of deflate that balloon right after the convention ends would be for RFK to drop out and endorse Trump, which he's rumored to be contemplating. So that'll be something to watch as well. What's it like on the ground in Ohio, Mike?
No, that's a really good question. I mean, Ohio is obviously turned deeply red now. I think we elected Trump in 2020, if I remember correctly. I think by six points. It used to be just like Florida, obviously, in past Republican elections. So, I mean, our state is absolutely deep red, pro-Trump. So that's, I see Trump signs everywhere. I talk to people at my church voting Trump and talking about, various things happening just in the modern kind of evangelical movement. You see evangelicals for Harris and those kind of things cropping up, but that's really kind of at like the striver class, kind of elite class in that movement. I mean, anybody who I talk to, pretty much everybody I talk to, they're going to be voting for Trump in the fall. So, I mean, the energy I think is high here. And then I did just want to go to the polls. I mean, in 2016 and 2020, Trump was behind markedly in many states. I mean, by 4, 5, 6 even percentage points. Some of those states he won. Some of those states he came within maybe half a percentage point from winning. I just went to the Real Clear Politics, all the polling that they do yesterday, and it says Harris up by 0.5% here, maybe nationally, 1.8% say in Pennsylvania. I mean, that is still absolutely what that tells me is Trump is still in the lead. I think Axelrod is exactly right. It's his race to lose. If the RFK endorsement actually comes, that could be significant. That could move it 1 to 2 percentage points, definitely, to have, a key Democrat named Kennedy siding with a Republican. I think I think it's easy to maybe underestimate what that would do. Even some of the older voters who were, say, around for JFK and realizing, oh, wow, a Kennedy siding with a Republican. I mean, what is going on with the Democrats? It's kind of a Reagan move where, they left me, I didn't leave them. So that could help boost things and change things, in some small ways, but that ultimately are truly significant electorally in nationally.
He comes to us now at the turning of the tide. RFK. I love RFK as like the sleeper agent that finally gives us not quite the October surprise, but that's a really interesting take on RFK, actually, Mike, that he is in some sense his main role in this election might turn out to be kind of like the Barry Weiss candidate, like not in the sense that Barry, I think, is going to vote for him or anything, but that he speaks for all these people who still are effectively libs, in their sensibilities, in the old fashioned sense of the term of being generally quite laissez-faire on social stuff and blah, blah, blah. But totally don't want to vote for Kamala or whatever, that maybe he will be like the emblem of that kind of attitude, and his endorsement will actually matter for those people. My goodness, are we actually talking hopefully on this podcast about good news? This is wild.
Well, we haven't heard what RFK is going to do yet.
True.
Yeah, it's the Joe Rogan vote in a way, right? And a big portion of his very large audience. Maybe that would be the permission slip to finally hold their noses and vote for Trump. We will see. And then there's one last point on the comms operation being run by the mainstream media. I don't know if you guys probably saw this. What, it was a week ago, maybe, where one of the, well, not a surrogate, but one of the Harris campaign people told the press when they asked about her policy agenda, they said, no, I mean, we really feel free to leave the policy agenda kind of off the table and just allow the press. We think the press can really explain and defend our policy plan. We don't really need to release one. Pretty telling remark. I mean,
we don't need no stinking policies.
You can't imagine a campaign official from either the two Obama administrations doing such a thing, or even the first Biden campaign. It's kind of extraordinary.
Yeah. No, it's the whole thing is so out of the ordinary. Like, it is the most epochal, bizarre presidential election cycle I have ever lived through. And we've all been through Trump 2 times already, which was kind of mind-boggling. But the difference here is nobody's talking about it. Nobody, like the press, is sort of pretending it's not happening. So every now and then you have to check in and be like, oh, wait, they literally just like Godfather 2'd the sitting president of the United States, sent him out for a fishing trip. And now there's this like DEI, this like DEI AI creation basically running for president. It is all kind of bizarre. I have this one question that we were talking about before we started rolling that I want to just throw at you guys in our remaining waning time here, which is, for so long, the story about American politics has been that we're at each other's throats. We don't agree about anything. We're split down the middle, partisan-wise. And we've gotten so used to that as a reflexive idea that it might be hard for us to even notice if people were ever coming together, like if there were a convergence. And this inspires me to ask, not like, are we all about to join hands and sing Kumbaya and stride forward into the republic as originally founded? That's not what I'm asking at all. But like, are people kind of starting to agree on a set of broadly populist economic policies, leaving aside entirely for a second whether not taxing tips is good or bad or irrelevant, whether we like bread lines or don't want bread lines or whatever, just like from a coldly analytical standpoint? Are people converging, and are the parties converging on something here after our many years of partisanship?
At least in terms of results, I think. Devil's always in the details, but you're led back to Carville's old line in the Clinton campaign, which is, it's the economy, stupid. So I think in that sense, it's nothing new. I think a broad majority of Americans would like the obvious things, right? They'd like to be able to afford a house. They wouldn't like it. They'd like their groceries to drop 30 to 40% from back to where they were at the end of the Trump administration. And they'd like not to worry about healthcare costs. So both parties in various ways, with some success and some failures, take each of those policy areas individually, and it's a mixed bag, have been trying to find some sweet spot economic populist message. And, Kamala stealing Trump's stuff is a good sign of that, or leading indicator of that, even though I think it's completely disingenuous, or mostly disingenuous, from the top of the Democratic ticket. I think she is saying what she is, walking back policies and saying what she thinks she needs to say to win. And I wouldn't trust at all her follow through on any of that stuff. With the one mild coda to that, which is, if she does win, she will want to get reelected. So she will have to do, I think, something to try to address those problems. And so she can't just completely go in the opposite direction. So there's always the break of the incentives built into the framers' system of electing and reelecting presidents that puts a break on some of the worst tendencies of the left on economics. But yeah, I mean, the real battleground is the culture wars. That is to say, the stark differences. I mean, the down to fundamental anthropology and biology, among other things. So I think on economic policy, there's a lot less disagreement. I mean, we don't get into arguments with friends and family or extended acquaintances who are on the other side of the political divide that much about marginal taxation or affordability of housing, maybe the healthcare question, because the lines have been drawn between, single payer and all of its attendant problems versus something else. But yeah, no, the real divisions are on the cultural side of things.
Yes, and we have shelved those for the time being, it seems, or at least they're already decided.
Yeah, the two parties are stuck in their ruts. Although you've had Trump tacking to the middle a bit on the abortion question over the last 2 months, of course.
Yeah, I think you have just, in some policies, you have Biden kind of bringing domestic manufacturing back home. You have some of those things, some of those convergences there. But I think like what Ryan said, it really, there is a massive still theoretical disagreement. The laws of nature and of nature is God. I mean, there is a fundamental disagreement in this country about what those two things mean, the authority of those two things. One side wants to uphold them. One side wants to utterly reject it. I mean, what is a man? What is a woman? That is utterly rejecting it. I think you can't get more not in favor of those principles of our founders as what the left is doing. So I still think that there's some massive issues. I mean, there's really in a way to think about it, and it's probably been said before on this podcast, but there's essentially two different kind of nations kind of living in the same geographic territory. And that is a fundamental kind of meta problem of our politics that I don't know how we solve. I don't think anybody really knows how we solve, but it's there and it's been festering and it's been growing for quite a long time. So that's a thing that is still very present and that we do have to deal with. We have to acknowledge. It's funny me going from kind of more optimistic the last question to maybe black pill in a way with this one, but I just think it's true. We have to face up to reality, but we then can't just stop there. We then have to go forward and use prudence and use our skills, use our reason to try to figure out, okay, how do we get back to some semblance of what the founders established? How do we do that given our circumstances today? So that I think is the fundamental question.
And I still think there's a big swath of Americans somewhere in the middle who, they want to be tolerant and friendly and non-mean to various, sexual and identity-based minorities of various sorts. They don't want to be bad neighbors or be mean to anyone. But they haven't really taken a side either way on the question of the laws of nature and nature's God to the extent that they even think about them much. So that's where a lot of these bread and butter economic policies are more widely held. And then on the cultural war question, I keep repeating what I continually find to be true, which is if you describe the leading edge of leftism on these questions, on the culture war questions, to a lot of just normal kind of, I mean, how many independent voters are there? I don't know. But kind of to squishy Republicans or squishy Democrats in that broad swath of the middle, they think you're making them up or that that really can't be the agenda of the left. So I think to the extent that the left campus keeps spilling, whether it's on the Israel anti-Semitism question or some of these harder identity questions about trans and all the rest, I think to the extent that the campus keeps spilling onto the streets and into our national political conversation, there's still a big opportunity for the right to win the culture war in a way, or win a majority of the country on especially the worst ends of modern leftism. But we'll see.
To Mike's point about switching from the white pill to the black pill. You may have heard this already on the show, Mike, but I, at least on the show, I'm perpetually quantum pilled, which is to say I maintain a stance, a kind of double vision about the future at all times. And the reason is actually perfectly illustrated in what you just said and what Ryan just said, which on one level looks like two different things, right? You were saying that there's two fundamentally opposed populaces living in the same geographic space, and that there's a mutually irreconcilable difference of first principles at stake in that dispute. Ryan was saying, yes, but many of the people are actually not that philosophical and just haven't like thought that hard down to those roots. What's amazing to me is that I think both of those are 100% true. I think that that's both of those situations are going on. That the parties are, at least in their actions, if they're not occupied by great philosophers, they're nevertheless animated by two great opposing philosophies, which have real consequences, life and death consequences, and are kind of moving these larger units of American people against each other. At the same time, Ryan, the people I talk to fit exactly your description, basically everywhere. Like in red states, blue states, purple states, like they are generally good-natured in a very American-seeming sort of way, incredulous, disbelieving about the excesses when you describe them that are totally real and that you can find real hard evidence for, but kind of eager, like desperate for somebody to show them a like normie politics that fits their general desire to live in what they understand to be the United States of America. And the reason I asked the question is I'm finding it kind of remarkable that convergence is happening, and the parties are showing themselves both, I think, a little less principled than people like us would like. I mean, I would really like it if the left came out and said what they want, and I would really like it if the right, the Republicans rather, could be more forthright about issues like abortion. But both of them are not doing that. So there seems like kind of this wiggle room maybe in there that's emerging. And the fact that they're not, the Democrats used to wear kind of classical republicanism as a skin suit. They used to want to talk about their fiscal responsibility and stuff. And they've switched, it seems, to wearing Trumpism as a skin suit, which is actually like a different thing and suggests that whatever the populist uprising was that motivated Trumpism and Bernieism too, again, like it or lump it, that spirit is now the thing that everybody is like rushing to represent themselves as the authentic kind of dispenser of, which is new.
Yeah, no, I think that's really clear. And actually, one example that I forgot about, Tim Walz saying, basically trying to talk about his populism, as a teacher, football coach, etc., making fun of JD Vance for going to Yale. Yeah, you're right. They're trying to out Trump. That's very clear. I mean, which kind of is amazing when you think about it. It's like, okay, these people, oh my gosh, we no money, football coach, etc. It's like, well, wait a minute, but you're the same people who hold all those institutions, Yale, Harvard, everything. That's yours too. So, I mean, trying to have it both ways and kind of squeeze the middle. It's kind of like a top kind of bottom coalition. So that's just an interesting aspect. I think that's absolutely right. Just going back to, I think, just this larger discussion. No, Ryan, I think you're really getting at something too. I was probably looking at something from a little bit more of just a philosophical level, regime kind of level politics. But I think that is undoubtedly right too. Whoever kind of moves the middle, clearly wins. I mean, that seems like an elementary kind of political stance or take, but I think that's definitely true. And I think just the fact too, to even maybe add a white pill in here, the fact that Trump could even possibly be elected in 2016, I think gives you hope that, look, America is not over. There's still much to be written, much to be done. Even at a philosophical level, I think there are, some fundamental issues that need to be resolved. I still think we're in a way, even in 2024, where those things, they can be resolved. It'll take some time. Look at how long it took for the progressives, early progressives, Woodrow Wilson, et cetera, to the New Left to march through the institutions. It took well over 100 years. So I think it could take, that amount of time going forward, maybe even more. But I still think we are in an age where it is still possible to resolve these questions in a fundamental way that I still think we should have hope that we can. I think, the ultimate kind of black pill, everything's gone. We need to reject that, but we do need to be honest about where we are. But I think we do need to be hopeful about where we could go.
Mike Sabo's statesmanly debut on the American Mind podcast. I will just, let's just end on this. I think there is take your metaphor. There is a $1,000 bill lying on the sidewalk for either party to both drive wedges into the other to court the middle of the country with some sweet spot combination of cultural and economic issues. I see not too much evidence that either party or leadership of either party is pursuing that strategically and methodically. And I think so. In that sense, we're still awaiting a breakout. And we should remember that the last 40 years of American politics have been kind of weird in the run of American politics. We've brought this up before. It's weird to be trading presidential and congressional power every cycle or every other cycle, and to be kind of gridlocked, and to have neither of these two parties break out and dominate national politics for a generation. So that could still happen. That pressure cooker lid could come off at some point. Maybe it's in the form of an international crisis leading to a fiscal crisis, but both parties, and I say this as a partisan of one of them, so I hope the other one, I hope the Republican Party gets it right first, but both parties need to be prepared to take advantage of whatever crisis may come to maybe kind of break open the national conversation. But I think we're a ways off from that yet. Whatever happens in this 2024 election, we remain a pretty closely divided country. And whatever else that means, it means that runaway extremism on either side is unlikely. And that's a good thing in the sense of, you don't want to be runaway hyperpartisanship and extremism from either side would be quite destabilizing. And so we're still awaiting the prudential excellence of someone to help break us out of what has been a 40-year run of gridlock. Well, much to think about, much to talk about. We maybe talk about next time about the other possible October surprise, which is international events. We do still have a presidency occupied by a man who we think is not quite up to it. So external events could always throw a wrench in the plans of both campaigns over the next 2 months. With that, I think we'll end for this week. Thank you all for listening once again to the Roundtable. If you want to see more of our work at the Claremont Institute, go to www.claremont.org. If you'd like to support us, claremont.org/donate. We're always very grateful. Check out our publications, ClaremontReviewBooks.com, which has a new issue dropping online, I think, Monday, Spencer?
Yeah, it should be going up over the weekend. Don't quote me on that because I don't do the online stuff. But.
Yeah, in Pixels over the weekend, and then in your mailboxes if you're a subscriber in the next couple of weeks. Some interesting stuff in there, including for all of you political philosophy nerds, Mike Anton on Harvey Mansfield's new big book on Machiavelli. For non-nerds, there's normal essays about the election and what to make of all things that are going on, including Caldwell on Europe and populism in Europe and all the rest. So check that out. And then, of course, our site here, the namesake of this podcast, AmericanMind.org. And then all the interesting work going on in DC and around the states on policy and the battle of ideas, where the rubber meets the road at dc.claremont.org. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next week.